I'm Laura Lee from Live from Studio Venus, which is a show and podcast here in Lethbridge, Alberta, where we like to talk about Lethbridge artists, what they're doing, and a bit about their process. So I have Annie Martin here. She's an artist and a professor up at the University of Lethbridge, and has a show going on currently in this amazing space we're in, the Trianon. There's, what do we have, a week from today before it comes down?
It comes down on Friday.
Oh, Friday.
Yeah.
So hurry up.
Yeah.
I'm going to post it tonight.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
hurry.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it doesn't come down on Friday, sorry. It's open on Friday. I'm here on Friday afternoon, 2 to 5, and welcoming people to come by. And then it'll be up over the weekend, but the gallery's not open. But I could make appointments for viewings on the weekend if there are people who can't make it on Friday.
Oh, that's really nice.
We're really hoping to come.
Yeah?
Yeah. The show will come down on Monday.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, if you want a message on our social media, I can make sure I pass it on to Annie right away, because you probably don't want to put out your personal profile out there, right?
I'm on Facebook. You can find me.
Yes, that's true. So yeah, come by even Friday. That'd be better. You can ask her what's going and give her feedback as to how you feel. So speaking of the show, we were talking earlier, and you said this kind of grew out of a writing project. Is writing something that's always interested you?
I would say yes. I remember trying to write a folk song when I was like 10 years old.
Oh.
And I thought I would like to be a singer-songwriter.
So was music your first?
I was surrounded by music when I was growing up. My parents were really interested in music. They were like passionate amateurs. And we listened to a lot of music in the house, a lot of classical and folk, and of course AM radio, everything that came that way. But I myself was not a musical kid. Like, I loved music, loved dance. I tried to play the piano. I was desperate to be able to play and sing pop songs on the piano, and I got really frustrated because I didn't and I took piano lessons, and I didn't like that either. The piano teacher was mean, and I had a memory that she was mean, and my best friend recently reminded me that she actually was mean. She used to rap us on the knuckles with a ruler if we played a wrong note. And I was like, oh, I didn't make it up. She really was mean. So yeah, somehow even with my love of music, it didn't take for me when I was a kid. So I was also surrounded by art growing up. My mom was a painter and weaver and crafty person, and the island was full of artists where I grew up. But I didn't necessarily become an artist at that time either. When I was younger, I didn't think I had what it took. Yeah. Because I wasn't the kid who could draw anything.
That's so me.
Right?
Yeah.
And there were a few people around me who were that kid.
Yeah.
And they, immediately upon graduating from high school, they went to Emily Carr and studied art. And they're, for the most part, still making art. Very dedicated artists. So wonderful people, wonderful artists. But they had that really early career trajectory of being into art. I was more eclectic in my interests, but you were asking me about what was music my first love, and before that you said writing something I've always been involved with. So I always loved writing. And I think, but I wasn't a prolific writer. I'm an Aries, and I'm kind of like a butterfly. I kind of flip from thing to thing, and I don't necessarily dig in unless I decide to. So I did writing for my friend of mine, and I published a poetry review in high school and wrote poetry, which was terrible. I thought that the lyrics of Elton John songs were the height of, of
love,
literature. I just loved the kind of passionate, like someone broke my heart tonight, that kind of Yeah,
Angst.
Angst.
You need
So
that teenage angst.
We wrote teenage angst poems, and I wrote a short story about a girl hitchhiking to Vancouver to get an abortion, which was not autobiographical, but it was like a speculative.
Oh yeah.
Because
you
had to go
performance art.
Yeah, and then I guess because I studied art, I went to university. Well, I studied languages and linguistics, and then I switched to art after about 3 years. But there was always writing going on in university, reading and writing, and I developed a special love of theory, which I find to be very poetic.
Yes.
So theoretical writing that's has a really writerly quality. Someone like Roland Barthes, or there's a bunch of writers I really love, Jean-Luc Nancy, the French feminists. Just like it's not just philosophy or theory. It's deeply poetic.
Yeah.
And that's always interested me, and I've aspired to write like that when I write.
Yeah.
But back to your question again, the recent project came out of something really entirely different, which was that I decided I was going to try and write song lyrics. So maybe going back to that moment when I was 10 or...
So it sounds like music was your first love in a way, because you could have gone either way, into the art or music more at that time, right?
Yeah.
That you wanted that music.
I'm grateful that I didn't go into music, and not that I would have had that capacity necessarily, but because I think I have terrible stage fright.
But you're singing now.
Right, we'll get to that. I think that the pressure, I imagine you kind of go over, you overcome it at a certain point, but to be a musician and be a professional and have that pressure there all the time, to overcome one's stage fright and really put yourself out there day after day. Yeah. I think I wouldn't be suited to that in terms of personality. Yeah. I like the solitary quality of writing and of painting.
Yeah. Yeah, I do too, and yet I have had times when I've had a lot of collaborations, particularly with painting, and it's a really interesting, difficult, but also very telling, right, in who we are, and it's very collaborative, but. Yeah, I kind of do like, to me, the studio is that's a nice part of it, is it's this sort of quiet space. And in my studio that I have here, I have like a writing and reading space, because to me, reading and writing is just as important as turning around and where I can paint.
That's lovely. Yeah. I don't do all those activities in the same space, but I do. I like to bring artifacts that relate to the writing project into the studio space, and vice versa. So there's some overlap, or they talk to each other. Well, I'll bring fragments of text and pin them on the wall of the studio. Yeah. Things that I'm thinking about that relate to whatever it is I'm thinking through at the time. And then I'll bring fragments of image into the room where I write as well. So there's some reminder that, there's that other space that I go to and I work in as well.
And there's, I think with artists, and I think when you go to university, it's more understood that there's a lot of time where you don't actually do work, because you're thinking, you're maybe even reading and researching, right? But there's a lot of time where we need that space in between. Yeah. And I don't know that that's as recognized, right, by anyways.
Yeah. I guess that's a work habit too, right? Yeah. And sometimes it's a luxury to have the time to write on your own schedule. But I think when I was younger, and still really, if there's a deadline, I will push to the very 11th hour. And then,
does that mean you let your students do that?
And then panic write.
Yeah.
So I still have that. I definitely did that with my essays in art history and any theory courses I was taking. Yeah. It was only after a while, probably in grad school, that I realized that writing could actually be creative. Even prose writing, like writing an essay, was very creative, and that to tap into that space, I needed to give myself more time. So I couldn't do the 11th hour. Yeah. I had to pull back.
Yeah.
And start trying to give my voice space to come out.
Yeah.
So one thing I did that was helpful was I started recording myself.
Oh, visually or audioly or both?
Audio recording.
Yeah.
And then transcribing, and then asking myself, what am I really trying to say?
Yeah.
Because when we're speaking, we're trying to communicate. We're trying to say something.
Yeah.
With a specific kind of turn of affect, or it's not just getting a fact across. There's a kind of quality to the communication that is also there, and somehow that transcribing and audio recording helped me.
It's such a way to learn how we are. Like, that's fascinating to me, because usually the first thing that's kind of human to do is go, oh, my voice sounds weird, right? And so when you're trying to just listen to your voice, I think it's kind of distracting. Whereas then taking that and transcribing it, again, the act of doing that, now your brain has something else that's going on just by doing it. And then reading and studying it, it's kind of lovely, because you keep almost thinking the same thing over and over in a different space.
Right, yeah. And then I guess it is kind of like an editing process as well, because once you have heard yourself trying to say the thing you're trying to say, then you realize from an outside perspective, well, that needs to be tweaked. That needs to be worked on. Yeah.
So we were talking really briefly about sort of where you got started, and so we're sort of at your university stage. I think because we got here, it would be great to be able to have maybe a second session. So I just want to keep that in mind, because I'd almost like to sort of almost go back, but I'd kind of like to talk about your current work, just because it can be shown. But it would be really great if you'd come back, because there's so many questions I have to ask you about your process and how you came along, and then how you ended up in our little prairie town. So, but let's go to this work. And like I'd sort of said, you started with a sabbatical for writing, or taking a residency?
Yeah,
or is that how it started?
That was how it started. I didn't have a sabbatical for writing, but I decided that I wanted to do this writing. And what I specifically wanted to write, explore through reading, and then also begin to write, was verse to be sung, so lyric, in which the singer, the subject singing, is addressing death.
Okay.
So that was right from the beginning. I knew that was the subject matter, and that I was interested in exploring. And it was partly because I think I needed to think about my own mortality and death and dying. I hadn't done that sufficiently, and I had a kind of an intuition that was something that would be useful to do for me, to not be kind of avoiding thinking about mortality, because I want to be able to help people who are facing that. I want to be able to really be there for them and for myself when I'm in. And
do you mean in a formal aspect, to be there for people, just in life?
Just in life, not a formal, not a professional, just a friend. Or a friend, or a family member, to really be able to be present. And I didn't feel like I had that capacity.
And was it just sort of like a birthday hit, and it's like, ooh, mortality?
Well, it came like, so I'm kind of talking very cyclically, but it came out of the previous project I had been working on, which was a project in which I was looking at the visions and song literature of Hildegard of Bingen, who was a medieval nun and writer, prolific writer and musician. That project was exploring the experience of a heightened sense of spiritual connection with Source, or God in her case. I was really curious about like going inside of that experience. What is really going on in mind and body and feeling world when someone feels that God is present, or their source is present? And she was a vehicle for me to explore that through. But in so doing, I realized that mortality was like the frame around that.
Right.
Like the reason why humans want to experience connecting with Source is because we're mortal.
Yeah.
And we know that we need to go sometime, and that we have an aspiration that we'll feel a connection to something. So Hildegard made me think, in some way, it turned me to the topic of death and dying.
Yeah.
But her work is not about death and dying. It's full of life and vibrancy and imagery around life and nature, but it still gave me that idea, this is where I want to go next. So I got, I'm also, so I felt like I needed to do the work, but I also, for myself, I also am really, really interested in imagery around the past, the crossing over and the going into the underworld, this kind of imagery, like really deep mythology around what happens when souls pass and where do they go.
Yeah.
For some reason, that I'm not into horror, I'm not into suspense, but the image of Charon in his boat rowing you across the river Styx, and that sense of crossing over, which also comes up in Buddhist literature around the role of the bodhisattva is to help someone pass over, cross over. So it's a sense of that beautiful, almost like a landscape image of a death or a departure. But the boat, something about that just is so powerful for me. And the other one that really, really fascinated me was the idea of going into the underworld. Like Demeter, the goddess, losing her daughter Persephone, and Persephone having to go to the underworld to be with Hades, and then come back. That something about that imagery just really shook me. And so,
does it shake you as? And I hope it's not too personal. Does it shake you as someone who believes in God, or does it? What do you mean by that? I guess.
I don't believe in capital G, D. Yeah. The patriarch with the white beard, or even the softer, kinder Christ version. I think Christ was an interesting philosopher and a very powerful teacher, among others. But so I'm not Christian. Yeah. But clearly there's a hole. There's a hole.
So investigating that then is interesting to you.
Looking for it, I think that the reason why that imagery is so powerful to me is because it goes to something really core. The encounter with death, possibly, or with God, if you believe in God, or with your source, is kind of like an encounter on some level with oneself, or one's true self. It's an encounter that we all kind of long for. Yeah. And sort of can't find necessarily, we don't find in our everyday life. And
it's always interested me that through like history and countries and just sort of ages and ages, people have looked to a deity or someone who will have a comfort when someone dies, or that gives you all these different things that, like you say, is kind of this human condition. And so it's always fascinated me that to this day there's lots of different ones in different places, but they all center around sort of one person that's helping to guide them. So except sort of like you said, sort of Buddhist and that kind of thing is
like those
kind of a different philosophy maybe, but I mean it's really interesting.
I think and in something like Hindu or Buddhist, in the kind of mythic realm, there are multiplicity of deities,
right.
But each one of them can be addressed as to be the helper, right? They have different characteristics, or you go to them for different things.
Yeah.
But they all have that help. Yeah, there's this kind of longing for that.
Yeah.
Connection with a helper.
I always wish I believed in God, or don't always believe, but there's something about it that really makes me wish I could believe, because it's lovely that way, right? And it has so many opportunities, and but I just can't. But there it is, like it's sort of seems like it's lovely and comforting, and yet I've been organized religion and it's not.
Right. Yeah.
But it does, it has that, seems like full of promise to think of somebody else that is there to give us love and created us.
Yeah.
And help us with our,
I think that's a really deep human need, and I think it's real.
Yeah.
It's real. And if religion fulfills that, if an organized religion fulfills that for someone, then I think they're very fortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I have philosophical difficulties with, let's just take Christian philosophy.
Yeah.
I attended a church recently because I just had this longing to hear music. This was before COVID, so it was last winter. And I really, really wanted to hear some music. I wanted to, be in that collective space of the church. I love the acoustics. I love churches. Let's just face it. I love the space.
Me too. Yeah.
And I went, and I found myself both like really moved by what was going on, because the ritual is moving. Human ritual is moving. It's compelling. It's shared. And I also, in my mind, was arguing with the sermon, or finding points in the sermon, because I felt like what was going on that was wrong for me was the centering of the anthropocentrism, the centering of the human, that's so insistent in the Christian ethos, where humans, like that somehow the idea that the world was created for humans.
Yeah.
And I currently disagree with that. I've always kind of disagreed with that, but I really strongly think that that's one of our biggest errors, in that the thinking the world was created for us, or somehow even that we human beings are so different from other sentient beings, and even plants, which are also sentient, that we are exceptional. I think that's where we've gone so far off track or astray, because we are absolutely and humbly dependent on all these other beings and plants. And I mean, we literally wouldn't have air to breathe.
Oh, right.
It's like so I think that's philosophically one of my criticisms of Christianity, the way it's presented, is that it centers the male. It centers a male God. That's always been a pet peeve all my life.
Too. You know what? I had a philosophy teacher. I don't know if he's still up at the university, Bryson Brown. And I think it was the philosophy of science. But through the entire class, or not like the entire semester, he never ever used he for God. He used she. And of course, the first few times he used it, my ears were like, I can't wait till he slips up into, I don't know why, but I was waiting for him, and he never once did. He referred to God as she the entire time. And it was just so interesting, but just by sort of tweaking that gender, so it was still saying God, so let's call her, just the same as calling a he, call it a she, no one really knows kind of thing. But it just kind of flipped things a bit, right? And so it flipped that gender, and it made it, in a way, more open to kind of figure out as well what was going on around it. So I just found by slipping that a little bit, it certainly kind of, I don't know, it does, right? Rather than just accepting this male patriarchal God, because he doesn't seem that nice to me, really.
Well, yeah, I think having the figurehead be a male patriarch just sets up a whole kind of hierarchy that puts power in the hands of male patriarchs, right? Yeah. Which is pretty clearly how it was all designed. Yeah. And we have a problem with that.
Yeah. Okay, so we kind of have this, bit that you're looking at, this death and how organized spaces and what there is. So then what do you do with that? So you've sort of got this information. Is that where then you pulled in this writing, right?
Yeah, I guess the writing was always a collaboration. It came out of a conversation with a singer. And she agreed to collaborate with me. We both agreed that we wanted to work together on this project. So when I went away to do the writing, I already had her in my mind. And I had our conversations in my mind, and some of the things she had told me she thought about death and dying and mortality. And so even as I was writing, I wasn't just writing from my own experience or my own thoughts on the subject matter. I was writing out of a conversation, which was really satisfying to do. Yeah. And because it was me, I use he, she, her pronouns, and identify as a woman. Yeah. And my collaborator also identifies as a woman. There was always this underpinning of, these are songs of female voices. There's one exception. There are two poems out of the whole set of lyrics, which aren't from a feminine perspective. One is called "A Dude Chats with Charon," and it's a dude. It's a good-hearted man who is drinking a beer and suddenly dies. That's the character, and what he sees and feels as he plummets into the underworld and then meets Charon, and is kind of trying to negotiate getting across the river in the boat, but he doesn't have any money. So that's one of the men, and the other is a character who is non-binary and fluid, and so moves between identity positions. But I felt it was really important for the voice to be female. Not just because we were both women working on the project, but because I felt like I'm still thinking this through, there's something about women giving up the power to negotiate and assist and understand death and dying. That somehow, much like, I think, midwifery, which was taken out of women's hands and put into the hands of medical professionals, e.g. men, doctors, physicians. Yeah. I suspect that the care for the care for the dying, and some of this sort of spiritual help and care that would go along with that was taken out of the hands of women and put into the hands of the priest, and the doctor and the undertaker. Yeah. And then hence kind of distanced from our experience and made medical, and made horrifying, made frightening, cold, heavy, expensive, toxic, literally toxic. Yeah. So all of this was, and so there's something about, what if we just take this material back? Like, what if we just take this and write our own songs? Yeah. Write our own songs to death.
And were they melancholy?
No, not all of them, actually. Yeah, surprisingly. That was something that I felt was important. They're not laments. There are some laments. Yeah. There's some elements of lament. The most lamenting piece, actually, is the final piece that I wrote, which is entitled "Greed," and it's basically thinking through, death isn't the problem. Yeah. It addresses death. It says, what are you now, O piteous one, death?
Yeah.
when none living remained to die. So it was thinking about climate change, actually thinking about the Anthropocene and our like imminent climate death or like species death, climate disaster, and realizing death is actually like holding the hand of life. It's a dance partner with life. Death happens because life happens. And everything must die. Trees must die.
Yeah.
They can't live forever. It's very important that they die and they rot and they become soil and new trees grow.
Yeah.
So death is a life partner. It's a partner to life. The problem that's much bigger, that's going to abolish life and death, is greed.
Yeah, very much so.
And it's the greed of that we see right under our noses here in our province. We see it all over the world. I was thinking about Australia, and there's a phrase in that song, "Soft bodies drop from limbs," and that it sounds weird, like it sounds like a body falling off an arm, but actually it's the image is bats were dying in Australia.
Oh.
They were dropping from the branches they were hanging from, and they were being cooked. Because the temperature was too hot. So the little bodies of the bats were like falling to the ground. And that's something about that, the idea that greed, because coal mining is huge in Australia. They're like, the current Prime Minister of Australia is like insane. He like carried a piece of coal into the legislature like a baby.
Oh my gosh.
And it's like precious. God gave us this precious coal. We've got to dig it up. It's our purpose to dig up the coal. Meanwhile, the animals are dropping out of the trees dead.
Yeah.
They're not going to survive.
Yeah.
And of course, last summer, the fires, whenever the fires were then, and probably continuing. So that greed is that and I got really mad. See, I'm roiled up there.
Yeah,
it's
your
like
voice.
Our fighting with death is like a decoy. Our resisting death, like resisting, thinking that death is the problem. If there wasn't any death, like all these men, like the Orange Menace, who think they're going to live forever.
Yeah.
You know, and they're going to resist death. Meanwhile, they're ravishing the ecosphere.
Right.
To get rich. Like if you just sit with that for a bit, start to see that death is not the problem.
Yeah.
And so that was the final piece of the 13 lyrics, and it kind of shifted into a new gear, and it's probably where the next body of work will go. But
death is not the problem, but it's kind of the source, though, of then what humans take as sorrow, right? So are you hoping to kind of change that? So instead of seeing death as something that's sorrowful, I don't know if that's a word, that it's something that is comforted as sort of process in our ecosystems.
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? I mean, I think it is sorrowful because we don't want to leave life. Life is beautiful.
Yeah.
Right? We love life. We love each other. We love the world. And we don't want to leave the world.
Yeah.
So that's going back to the question of God again, right? But so it's not that it's not sorrowful or very grave, very serious business.
Yeah.
But it's like something. This is my mind is just kind of. I've been rolling over this. It's necessary.